The sharp crack of splitting wood echoed through the mountain valley, just as Tessa Montgomery's wagon lurched to a halt beside the surveyor's stake marking her new property line, and she knew with absolute certainty that her carefully planned solitary life was about to become infinitely more complicated. The year was 1889, and the land lottery in Wichita, Kansas had changed everything. Tessa had traveled 3 weeks from Missouri with nothing but her late mother's wedding ring, $200 saved from years of seamstress work, and a determination forged in the fires of loss. At 23 years old, she had buried both parents within 6 months of each other, and decided that starting fresh on her own piece of earth was better than staying in a town full of pitying glances and marriage-minded widowers old enough to be her father. The lottery had been her chance, her ticket to independence, and when they called her number for a 160-acre claim in the Kansas mountains near the Colorado border, she had wept with relief. What she had not expected was the man currently swinging an axe beside the property line, his broad shoulders flexing beneath a worn flannel shirt as he split logs with an efficiency that spoke of years in these mountains. His hair hung past his collar, dark as midnight and tied back with a leather cord, and even from a distance she could see the corded muscle in his forearms as he hoisted another log onto the stump. Tessa climbed down from her wagon, her simple gray traveling dress gathering dust as her boots hit the rocky ground. She had been prepared for wilderness, for hardship, for the back-breaking work of building a homestead. She had not been prepared for a neighbor, especially not one who looked like he could wrestle a bear and win. He must have heard her wagon because he straightened, turning to face her with an expression that shifted from surprise to something more guarded. His eyes were the color of pine needles, green and deep, set in a face that was all hard angles and sun-weathered skin. A thick beard covered his jaw, and he stood easily over 6 feet tall, his frame built like the mountains themselves, solid and immovable. "You are on my claim," Tessa called out, finding her voice and putting as much authority into it as she could muster. She had learned early that showing any weakness invited trouble. The man set down his axe and walked toward her, his stride long and unhurried. As he got closer, Tessa had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze, and she refused to let herself be intimidated by his size. She had faced down creditors and grave diggers and the long, lonely nights after her mother's funeral. She could handle one mountain man. "Ryland Ingram," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very air between them. "And that there is your fence line I am working on, not my claim. My property is on the other side of those stakes." Tessa blinked, following the direction of his gesture. Sure enough, the surveyor's stakes marked a clear boundary, and the fence posts he had been setting were positioned exactly along her side of the line. Heat crept up her neck as she realized her mistake. "I did not ask you to build my fence," she said, recovering as quickly as she could. Independence meant doing things herself, not accepting help from strange men who probably expected payment in one form or another. "Did not figure you did," Ryland replied, and there was something almost amused in his tone, though his expression remained serious. "But that fence line has been down for 2 years since the last claim holder abandoned the place, and I got tired of tracking elk across both properties when they wander through. Figured I would fix it proper before the new owner arrived." He paused, looking at her worn traveling clothes and the single wagon loaded with supplies that seemed pitifully small against the vast wilderness surrounding them. Did not expect that new owner to be a woman alone. There it was, the judgment she had been anticipating. Tessa straightened her shoulders. "I won this claim fair and square in the lottery. I have the deed right here, and I am perfectly capable of building my own homestead without assistance." Ryland studied her for a long moment, and she got the sense he was seeing far more than she wanted him to. "I am sure you are," he finally said, "but that does not change the fact that your fence was falling down and I already started fixing it. Seems wasteful to leave it half done." "I can finish it myself." "Could," he agreed, "but winter comes early this far up in the mountains, Miss Montgomery, Tessa Montgomery." She should not have given her first name, but it slipped out before she could stop it. "Miss Montgomery," he continued, and the way he said her name did something strange to her pulse. "You have got maybe 6 weeks before the first snow. And that is if we are lucky. You need shelter built, a well dug, food stored, and firewood cut. Enough to last you through to April, because once the passes close, you will not be getting supplies from town until spring thaw." Tessa had known the winters would be harsh, but hearing it laid out so plainly made her stomach tighten with anxiety. She had planned to hire help in town, but the workers she had spoken to had laughed when she told them where her claim was located. "Too remote," they said. "Too dangerous. Come back in spring and they might consider it." "I will manage," she said, Even though doubt was beginning to creep in at the edges of her determination, Ryland was quiet for another moment, then he nodded slowly. I expect you will. He turned back toward his side of the property line. I will finish this fence section since I already started it. You can take it as a welcome to the mountain, no strings attached. After that, you are on your own if that is what you prefer. He walked back to his work, and Tessa stood there feeling strangely dismissed and unsure whether she should be grateful or insulted. She had wanted independence, and here was a man offering to respect that. So why did part of her feel like she had just made a terrible mistake? The next 3 days passed in a blur of hard work. Tessa set up a temporary camp near the stream that ran through her property, using her wagon as shelter while she tried to figure out where to position her cabin. She had plans drawn up, measurements calculated, but actually executing them on unfamiliar terrain was proving more difficult than she had anticipated. Ryland continued working on the fence, and she tried not to watch him. Tried and failed, because the man was impossible to ignore. He worked from dawn until dusk without seeming to tire. His movements economical and practiced. She learned things just by observation. How to angle a post so it would resist the freeze and thaw of mountain winters. How to string wire tight enough to keep wildlife out but with enough give to prevent snapping in storms. How to read the land for the most efficient route. He never approached her camp, never spoke to her beyond a brief nod when their paths crossed near the stream. True to his word, he was leaving her alone, and Tessa told herself that was exactly what she wanted. On the 4th morning, she woke to find the fence complete, a solid barrier running the entire length of their shared property line. And Ryland was gone, no smoke rising from what she assumed was his cabin somewhere deeper in the trees on his claim. Tessa spent that day trying to dig post holes for her own cabin foundation, and by evening her hands were blistered raw, her back screaming in protest, and she had managed to complete exactly 2 holes out of the 16 she needed. At this rate, winter would arrive before she had walls up, and the thought made her want to cry with frustration. She did not cry. She had learned that tears accomplished nothing except making your face blotchy and your eyes sting. Instead, she wrapped her hands as best she could and forced down a cold dinner of bread and dried meat before crawling into her bedroll under the wagon. The sound of an axe woke her before dawn. Tessa scrambled out from under the wagon to find Ryland on her property, cutting down a dead pine with smooth, powerful strokes. Her indignation lasted exactly as long as it took her to notice the neat stack of already cut logs beside him, each one precisely the right length for cabin walls. "What are you doing?" she demanded, wrapping her shawl tighter against the morning chill. Ryland paused mid-swing, lowering the axe. "Morning to you too, Miss Montgomery. You said you would leave me alone after the fence was finished." "Said you would be on your own if that was what you preferred," he corrected. "Figured maybe you might reconsider that preference after a few days trying to homestead by yourself." His gaze dropped to her hands, and even in the dim pre-dawn light she knew he could see the bandages. "How many post holes did you manage?" Tessa wanted to lie. But what was the point? 2. He nodded like that was exactly what he had expected. "You need 16 for a cabin the size you are planning. At your current pace you will have your foundation ready sometime around Christmas. Assuming the ground does not freeze solid before then. I will work faster. You will injure yourself and then you will not be able to work at all." He set the axe down and moved closer, and Tessa fought the urge to step back. He was so large, so overwhelmingly present, and she was suddenly very aware that they were completely alone in thousands of acres of wilderness. But his expression was not threatening, just serious. "I have a proposal for you." "I am not interested in proposals." Something that might have been a smile flickered across his face. "Not that kind of proposal. A business arrangement. You need a cabin built before winter, and I need help with my stock before the snow closes us in. I have got elk and deer that need processing, preserving, storing. It is 2-person work, but I have been doing it alone since my partner headed back to civilization 3 years ago. You help me with that, and I will help you build your cabin. Fair trade of labor." Tessa considered his words carefully, looking for the trap. In her experience, men rarely offered help without expecting something more in return. "Just labor? Nothing else?" Ryland's expression hardened. "Just labor. I am not in the habit of taking advantage of women, Miss Montgomery, no matter what you might have experienced elsewhere. You would work during the days helping with my stock, and I would work on your cabin in the evenings and early mornings. Within 3 weeks, you would have a solid structure with a good roof, a working stove, and supplies stored for winter. In exchange, I would have enough preserved meat and supplies to last me until spring without working myself to exhaustion doing it alone." It was a sensible arrangement, almost too sensible. "Why do you even need help?" You seem perfectly capable of doing everything yourself. Capable does not mean it is not hard, he said quietly. I have been alone on this mountain for a long time, and sometimes it gets. He trailed off, looking past her toward the rising sun just beginning to paint the peaks gold. It gets quiet, too quiet, and the work goes faster with two. There was something in his voice, a loneliness that resonated with the empty place in Tessa's own chest. She thought about her parents, about the silence that had filled their house after first her father, and then her mother passed. She thought about the long wagon journey where the only voice she heard was her own. She understood quiet that became too much to bear. All right, she heard herself say, a fair trade of labor. But I want it clear that this is business only. I am not looking for anything else. Neither am I, Ryland said. But something in his eyes suggested that maybe they were both lying to themselves about that. We start today. Bring whatever hand tools you have and wear clothes you do not mind getting bloody. We have got 3 elk to process. Processing elk turned out to be the hardest, most exhausting, and somehow most satisfying work Tessa had ever done. Ryland's cabin was larger than she had expected, a solid 2-room structure with a covered porch and a smokehouse out back. He worked with quiet efficiency, teaching her how to properly butcher and preserve meat, how to render fat for cooking in candles, how to prepare hides for tanning. His hands were massive, scarred from years of hard work, but they moved with surprising delicacy when showing her the correct way to make cuts. He was patient when she made mistakes, never mocking or cruel, just calmly correcting and demonstrating again. You lived up here long? Tessa asked, on the 3rd day, as they worked side by side scraping hides. 7 years, Ryland replied. Came out after the war. Could not settle back into city life after everything, so I headed west and just kept going until I found a place that felt right. The war? Tessa did quick mental math. The Civil War had ended 24 years ago, which would make Ryland somewhere in his early 40s. Older than her by nearly 2 decades, though the mountain life clearly kept him strong. Was just a boy really, barely 16 when I enlisted, he said, confirming her calculations. Lied about my age like a lot of us did. Saw things no one should see, did things I am not proud of. When it was over, I tried going back home to Ohio, but the noise of the city, all those people. He shook his head, could not breathe, so I left. No family? Had a sister, but she passed from fever in '68. No wife, no children, just me and the mountain. Tessa worked in silence for a moment, processing this information. That does not sound like much of a life. Some days I would agree with you, Ryland said. Other days I think it is the only life that makes sense. No one up here cares what you did during the war, what nightmares you carry. The elk do not judge, the pine trees do not whisper. Just honest work and honest silence. Until it becomes too much silence, Tessa said softly, remembering his earlier words. Until that, he agreed. They fell into a rhythm over the following days. Mornings were spent at Ryland's cabin working on the harvest and preservation. Afternoons and evenings he worked on building her cabin while she prepared meals for both of them, another fair exchange. She learned that he took his coffee black and strong, that he had a weakness for biscuits with honey, that despite his size and strength he moved carefully around her, always conscious of not overwhelming her space. Her cabin took shape with remarkable speed. The foundation posts were set and secured within 2 days, the frame walls rising soon after. Ryland worked with the same quiet efficiency he brought to everything, and Tessa found herself studying him when she thought he was not looking. The way his muscles shifted beneath his shirt as he lifted beams into place, the concentration on his face as he measured and cut, the small satisfied sound he made when a joint fit together perfectly. She should not be noticing these things. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. She had come to Kansas for independence, not to develop feelings for a mountain man old enough to be, well, not her father, but certainly her much older brother, except her feelings were not particularly sisterly. You are staring, Ryland said without turning around, and Tessa felt heat flood her face. I was just making sure you were doing it correctly, she said, defensive. It is my cabin, after all. He did turn then, and there was something dancing in his green eyes that might have been amusement. You have questions about my joinery, Miss Montgomery? I might. Ask them then. But Tessa could not, because the only question in her mind was why her heart beat faster every time he was near, and that was not the kind of thing you asked a man you barely knew. Instead, she turned back to her cooking, stirring the stew with more force than necessary. 2 weeks into their arrangement, the first storm rolled in. Tessa woke in her wagon to thunder shaking the mountain and rain drumming so hard on the canvas cover that she could barely hear herself think. She crawled out to find the campfire drowned, her supplies getting soaked, and water starting to pool under the wagon. Tessa, Ryland's voice cut through the storm, and she looked up to see him running toward her, his long hair plastered to his head and his shirt already soaked through. You cannot stay here. The stream is rising. You need to get to higher ground. My supplies can be replaced. You cannot. Come on. He did not wait for her agreement, just started grabbing what he could carry and loading it into her wagon. Drive up to my cabin. The ground is higher there. You will be safe. Tessa wanted to argue, but another crack of thunder made her horse scream in fear, and she realized he was right. The stream was indeed rising, water already lapping at the wheels of her wagon. She climbed onto the driver's seat and urged her horse forward, following Ryland's tall form through the driving rain. His cabin sat on a rise that she now understood was deliberately chosen for exactly this reason. The water would never reach this high, and the solid walls kept out the worst of the wind and rain. Ryland helped her stable her horse in his small barn, then carried her most essential supplies into the cabin while she stood dripping on his porch, suddenly uncertain. Come inside before you catch your death, he called, and she had no choice but to obey. The cabin was warm, a fire already burning in the stone fireplace. Ryland handed her a blanket and pointed to a privacy screen in the corner. Hang your wet things over that to dry. I will turn my back. Tessa did as he instructed, her fingers clumsy with cold as she stripped out of her soaked dress and wrapped herself in the blanket. It smelled like pine and smoke and something indefinably Ryland, and she tried not to think about what it meant that she found that comforting. Decent? He asked, still facing the wall. Yes, he turned and something flickered across his face when he saw her wrapped in his blanket, her hair hanging loose and damp down her back, but he just gestured to the chair near the fire. Sit, warm up, I will make coffee. The storm raged for 2 days. Tessa slept in Ryland's bed while he took the floor, despite her protests that it should be the other way around. They played cards with a worn deck he pulled from a trunk, talked about everything and nothing, and slowly, carefully, began to know each other beyond the surface. She learned that he had taught himself to read from an old Bible, that he could recite poetry from memory, that his rough exterior hid a man who thought deeply about the world. He learned that she had supported her dying mother for 2 years with seamstress work, that she could calculate measurements in her head faster than most people could with paper, that her dream was to build something lasting with her own hands. Why never marry? Ryland asked on the second evening as they sat together watching the rain through the window. Pretty woman like you, good with numbers, hard worker. Must have had offers. I had offers, Tessa confirmed, but they were all from men who wanted a housekeeper or a nurse, not a wife. After my father passed, the widowers started circling like vultures. Men who knew my mother was sick and figured I would need providing for soon enough. They did not see me, just what I could do for them. Their loss, maybe. Or maybe I am just too stubborn and independent for my own good. That is what the church ladies said, anyway. Ryland was quiet for a moment. I do not think you are stubborn. I think you know your own worth and refuse to settle for less than you deserve. That is not a flaw, Tessa. That is strength. It was the first time he had used her given name without the formal Miss Montgomery, and the intimacy of it made her breath catch. She looked at him, really looked, and saw not just the mountain man who had been helping her build a cabin, but a man who understood her in a way no one else ever had. Ryland, she started, but did not know how to finish. I know, he said quietly. I feel it too. Have been feeling it since you stepped down from that wagon and tried to kick me off your property with nothing but stubborn will and a sharp tongue. He shifted closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his large frame. But you are young, and I am old enough to know better, and you came here for independence, not to get tangled up with a hermit who is more comfortable with trees than people. You are not that old, Tessa said, her voice barely above a whisper. And I do not care about the years between us. I care that you listen when I talk, that you teach without condescending, that you make me laugh even when I am exhausted and frustrated. She reached out tentatively, touching his hand. His skin was warm and rough, and he went very still. I care that for the first time since my parents died, I do not feel so terribly alone, Tessa. Her name was almost a groan. If we start this, there is no going back to the way things were. You understand that? I do not want to go back. He cupped her face with one large hand, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with surprising gentleness. You are sure? Because once I kiss you, I am going to want to keep kissing you. Once I have you, I am going to want to keep you. In answer, Tessa leaned forward and closed the distance between them. His lips were softer than she expected, gentle despite the beard, and he kissed her like she was something precious and fragile. But Tessa was neither of those things, and she pressed closer, her hands finding the solid wall of his chest. Ryland made a low sound and deepened the kiss, his arms coming around her to pull her against him. She fit against his large frame like she had been made for exactly this purpose, and when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Tessa knew with absolute certainty that this was what she had been searching for all along. Not just independence but partnership. Not just land but home. "I am keeping you," Ryland said, pressing his forehead against hers. "Fair warning, Tessa Montgomery. I am keeping you, and I do not share." "Good," she replied, "because I am keeping you right back." The storm broke the next morning, and they emerged into a world washed clean and sparkling. Tessa's temporary camp was indeed flooded, but her wagon and most of her supplies had survived. More importantly, her cabin had weathered the storm with only minor damage, a testament to Ryland's solid construction. They worked together to finish the cabin, and now there was no pretense about it being just a business arrangement. Ryland kissed her in the morning when they started work, kissed her at midday when they stopped for lunch, kissed her in the evening when they reluctantly parted ways. He courted her with careful propriety despite the passion that simmered between them, always conscious of her reputation even out here in the wilderness. The cabin was completed 3 weeks after they had started, and it was beautiful. Solid walls, a good roof, a stone fireplace that Ryland had built with his own hands. Tessa stood in the middle of her new home and felt tears prick her eyes. "It is perfect," she said. "It is yours," Ryland replied. "Built to last 100 years if you maintain it properly. You've got your independence now, your own land and your own home, everything you wanted." But Tessa realized that somewhere along the way, what she wanted had changed. The dream of solitary independence seemed hollow now compared to the reality of partnership, of building something together, of love. "Ryland," she said, turning to face him, "I need to tell you something." "All right, I love you." The words came out in a rush, and she saw his eyes widen. "I know I have only known you a few weeks, and I know this is probably crazy, but I love you. You are kind and patient, and you treat me like an equal, even though you could easily do everything yourself. You make me laugh, and you make me feel safe, and I do not want to live in this cabin alone. I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life." Ryland was quiet for a long moment, and fear began to creep in. Had she misread everything? Was the affection she saw in his eyes just friendliness, the kisses just casual? Then he smiled, really smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "Thank God," he said, "because I have been trying to figure out how to ask you to marry me without scaring you off. Marry you? Unless you have got objections." He crossed the room in 2 long strides and took her hands. "I know I am older, and I know I am rough around the edges, and I know I have got a past that is not always pretty, but I love you, Tessa. I think I started falling the moment you told me I was trespassing when I was fixing your fence. You are brave and smart, and you do not back down from anything, and I want to spend the rest of my days making sure you never regret taking a chance on a broken-down mountain man." "You are not broken down," Tessa said fiercely. "You are strong and good and everything I never knew I needed. Yes, yes, I will marry you." He kissed her then, lifting her clear off her feet, and Tessa wrapped her arms around his neck and held on tight. When he set her down, they were both grinning like fools. "We should do it soon," Ryland said, "before the pass is closed for winter. There is a circuit preacher who comes through Wichita once a month, and if we ride out tomorrow we might catch him before he moves on." "Tomorrow?" Tessa laughed. "That is fast. I have waited 7 years for you without knowing you existed," Ryland said. "I do not want to wait any longer than necessary." They rode to Wichita the next morning, a 2-day journey down the mountain. The town was small but growing, full of hopeful homesteaders and merchants eager to supply them. They found the circuit preacher at the small church on the edge of town, a kindly older man who agreed to marry them that very afternoon. Tessa wore the only good dress she owned, a simple blue cotton that her mother had made for her years ago. Ryland bought her a ring from the general store, a plain gold band that fit perfectly, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Tessa felt like her heart might burst with happiness. They spent their wedding night at the boarding house in town, and Ryland was gentle and patient as he showed her all the ways a man could love a woman. Tessa had been nervous, her only knowledge coming from vague warnings and whispered conversations, but Ryland made it beautiful, made her feel cherished and desired and completely safe. "I love you," he murmured against her skin as they lay tangled together afterward. "My brave, beautiful wife." "I love you too," Tessa replied, tracing the scars on his chest, each one a story he would tell her in time. "My strong, gentle husband." They returned to the mountain as the first snow began to fall, and spent that winter learning each other in the warmth and privacy of Ryland's cabin. Tessa moved her things from her own cabin, and they combined their households, 2 becoming one. The long winter months were everything Tessa had never known she wanted. They worked together to maintain their supplies, ventured out on snowshoes to check trap lines, read aloud to each other from Ryland's small collection of books by firelight. He taught her to shoot, to track, to read the signs of weather in the mountain sky. She taught him how to make a proper pie crust, how to mend clothes so the repairs were nearly invisible, how to let himself be cared for after a lifetime of doing everything alone. They made love frequently and enthusiastically, discovering each other with a passion that showed no signs of dimming. Ryland was careful with his strength, always conscious of the difference in their sizes. But Tessa loved the solid weight of him, the way his muscles shifted beneath her hands, the protective way he held her afterward like she was something infinitely precious. "I used to think I was happy alone," Ryland confessed one night as they lay together watching shadows dance across the ceiling. "But I was just avoiding being hurt again." "You are worth the risk, Tessa. Worth everything." Spring came slowly to the mountain, snow giving way to mud and then to wildflowers. They planted a garden together between the two cabins, deciding to keep both structures standing. Tessa's cabin became a workshop for her, a place where she could pursue her seamstress work and the leatherworking skills Ryland was teaching her. By summer, Tessa suspected she was pregnant, and by fall it was certain. Ryland was simultaneously thrilled and terrified, worrying constantly about her health and safety. He insisted they ride to Wichita to see the doctor, who confirmed everything was progressing normally and gave them instructions for what to expect. "A baby," Ryland kept saying, wonder in his voice. "Our baby. Are you happy?" Tessa asked, suddenly uncertain. They had never explicitly discussed children, though she had assumed they both wanted them eventually. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Ryland said, his hand splaying across her still flat stomach. "I thought I was too old for this, thought I had missed my chance at having a family. You have given me everything, Tessa, everything I never let myself hope for." Their daughter was born in early spring of 1891, during a late snowstorm that left them isolated for 3 days. Ryland delivered the baby himself with steady hands and whispered encouragement, and when he placed the squalling infant in Tessa's arms, they both wept with joy. They named her Rose, for the wild roses that grew on the mountain in summer, and she had her mother's dark hair and her father's green eyes. Ryland was besotted from the first moment, his large hands cradling the tiny baby with infinite gentleness. "She is perfect," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are both perfect." Tessa watched him with their daughter and felt her heart expand even further. This man, this strong, gentle, fiercely loving man, was hers, and she was his, and together they had created this new life. This perfect tiny person who would grow up knowing she was wanted and loved beyond measure. The years that followed were full and rich. Rose grew into a bright, adventurous child who loved the mountain as much as her parents did. Ryland taught her to track and shoot, while Tessa taught her letters and numbers. They were a family, complete and happy in their remote corner of the world. A son followed 2 years after Rose, a sturdy boy they named after Ryland's father. Then another daughter, and another son, until their home rang with laughter and noise in the beautiful chaos of children. Tessa sometimes worked her seamstress trade for people in Wichita, building a reputation for quality work, and the extra income helped them expand their homestead. Ryland built additions onto the cabin as their family grew, each room constructed with the same care and craftsmanship as that first structure. They made trips to town together, the whole family piling into the wagon, and people would smile to see them. The mountain man and his lovely wife, their brood of healthy, happy children. It was a good life, a full life, everything Tessa had dreamed of and so much more. On their 10th anniversary, Ryland took Tessa back to the spot where they had first met, where she had accused him of trespassing on her property. The fence he had built still stood strong, weathered but solid. "I was mending this fence," Ryland said, his arm around her waist, "and I had no idea my whole life was about to change. I was so determined to be independent," Tessa replied, leaning into his warmth. "So certain I did not need anyone." "You did not need me," Ryland said. "You could have built your homestead alone, could have made it work through sheer stubbornness and grit, but I am grateful every day that you chose to let me in anyway." Tessa turned in his arms, looking up at the man she loved more with each passing year. His hair was touched with gray now, his beard more silver than dark, but he was still strong, still the mountain-made man who had stolen her heart with his patience and kindness. "I won the claim beside yours in the land lottery," she said. "Best luck I ever had." "Second best," Ryland corrected, kissing her softly. "The best luck was that I decided to mend your fence that day instead of my own." They stood together as the sun set over the mountains, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life and a family in this wild, beautiful place. And as Tessa rested her head against her husband's broad chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The mountain man had mended her fence, and in doing so, had mended something in her heart she had not even known was broken. And she had given him back his life, had filled his lonely existence with love and laughter and the everyday miracle of family. It was more than either of them had dreamed of that day by the property line. It was everything. Years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Rose, their eldest, grew into a capable young woman who could track as well as her father and calculate measurements as quickly as her mother. She had her mother's fierce independence and her father's quiet strength, and when she turned 18, she announced her intention to file for a claim of her own further up the mountain. Ryland struggled with the idea of his daughter living alone in the wilderness, but Tessa reminded him that Rose was no different than she had been at that age, full of dreams and determination. They helped her file the claim and build her cabin, though Ryland made sure she had a rifle and knew how to use it. "She is so much like you," Ryland said to Tessa one evening after they had returned from helping Rose with her cabin raising. "She is like both of us," Tessa corrected. "Stubborn as me, protective as you." Their sons grew tall and strong, learning the mountain ways from their father and business sense from their mother. The younger girls showed talent with animals and plants, helping to expand the garden into something that could support not just their family, but provide vegetables to sell in town. The homestead that had started as 2 individual claims became a thriving family operation. Ryland still hunted and trapped, but now he had help processing the harvest. Tessa's seamstress work had expanded to include leather goods which sold well to new homesteaders. Together they had built something that would outlast them, a legacy for their children and their children's children. In 1899, on a crisp autumn day when the aspens had turned gold and the air smelled of coming snow, Tessa and Ryland celebrated their 10th anniversary by renewing their vows in the small church in Wichita. Their children stood witness, along with neighbors and friends they had accumulated over the years. The circuit preacher who had married them was long retired, but his replacement was happy to preside over the renewal ceremony. Tessa wore a new dress she had sewn herself, deep blue silk that Ryland had bought her as an anniversary gift, and Ryland wore his best clothes, his long hair neatly trimmed and his beard freshly barbered. "I still cannot believe you said yes to a rough mountain man like me," Ryland said as they danced at the celebration afterward. The boarding house dining room cleared to make space. "I cannot believe it took you mending my fence to get my attention," Tessa replied with a smile. "Though I am grateful you were too stubborn to ask permission first. Best decision I ever made, starting that fence without waiting for the new owner to arrive. Best decision I ever made was admitting I needed help, even though it terrified me to depend on anyone again." They held each other close as the music played, surrounded by their children and friends, by the life they had built together. And when the evening ended and they made the long ride back up the mountain to their home, it was with the deep satisfaction of 2 people who knew exactly how lucky they were. More years passed, bringing both joy and sorrow. Ryland's old war wounds began to trouble him on cold days, and Tessa developed arthritis in her hands that made fine sewing difficult. But they adapted, finding new ways to contribute to their family's prosperity, and their love never wavered. They became grandparents when Rose married a homesteader from a neighboring claim and presented them with a robust grandson. Then their eldest son married and added more grandchildren to the growing family. The 2 cabins that had started their story became the heart of a small family compound, with children and grandchildren building their own homes nearby. On their 20th anniversary in 1909, Tessa and Ryland sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of rose and gold. They were both graying now, their bodies marked by years of hard work and mountain living, but their hands were still intertwined, fingers interlaced as they had been for 2 decades. "Do you ever regret it?" Tessa asked. "Giving up your solitary life for all this chaos?" Ryland looked at the cabins scattered across the mountain, smoke rising from chimneys as families prepared evening meals. He listened to the distant sound of children laughing, grandchildren playing before being called in for the night. Then he looked at his wife, the woman who had changed everything. "Not for a single second," he said. "You gave me a life worth living, Tessa. Everything before you was just existing." "You saved me," Tessa said softly. "I was so lost after my parents died, so convinced that independence meant being alone. You taught me that strength is not about doing everything yourself, but about knowing when to accept help and when to offer it." "We saved each other," Ryland corrected. You came to this mountain running from loneliness disguised as independence, and I was hiding from life disguised as solitude. We found each other exactly when we needed to. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, they remained on the porch, comfortable in the silence that came from years of knowing each other completely. The fence that Ryland had mended all those years ago still stood, weathered but strong, a boundary marker that had become a bridge between two hearts. In the distance, a wolf howled, and Ryland unconsciously tightened his arm around Tessa's shoulders. Even after all these years, his protective instincts remained strong. She leaned into him, accepting his strength while offering her own steady presence in return. "I love you," Tessa said, the words as fresh and true as the first time she had spoken them. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Ryland replied, pressing a kiss to her silver-streaked hair. "You are my heart, Tessa Ingram. Everything good in my life started the day you won the claim beside mine." They sat together as the night deepened, two souls intertwined, bound by love and choice, and 20 years of building a life together. The mountain stretched out before them, eternal and unchanging, witness to their story and promise of continued seasons to come. Inside the cabin, the fire burned warm and welcoming, exactly like the love they had kindled between them. Outside, the first stars appeared, ancient light that had traveled vast distances to shine down on this particular mountain, this particular porch, this particular couple who had found each other against all odds. And in the morning they would wake together as they had for thousands of mornings before, ready to face whatever the day might bring, secure in the knowledge that they faced it together. The mountain man who had learned to love again, and the woman who had taught him, partners in work and in life for all their days. The story that had begun with a fence and a land lottery had become something far greater than either of them could have imagined. It had become a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone, carried forward by children and grandchildren who knew that true strength came not from standing alone, but from standing together. As they finally rose to go inside, Ryland held the door for his wife, and Tessa paused to look back at the mountain one last time. Somewhere out there, new homesteaders were likely arriving, full of dreams and determination, just as she had been 20 years ago. She hoped they would be as lucky as she had been, hoped they would find what she had found, that the greatest claim you could win was not land or property, but a heart freely given and a love built to last. Ryland followed her gaze, understanding without words what she was thinking. He always understood. That was the gift they had given each other, the ability to be truly known and truly accepted, scars and strengths and everything in between. "Come to bed, wife," he said gently, and Tessa smiled at the warmth in his voice, the promise that even after 20 years their passion had not dimmed. "Coming, husband," she replied, and together they crossed the threshold into the warmth and light of home. The door closed behind them, shutting out the mountain cold, sealing in the warmth they had created. And if the walls could talk, they would tell a story of love found in unexpected places, of two people who had each thought themselves complete alone, only to discover that together they were something infinitely greater. The fence Ryland had mended still stood in the darkness outside, a testament to the day that changed everything. And in the cabin, in the warmth of the fire and the comfort of their bed, two hearts beat in rhythm, bound by love and choice and the simple miracle of finding your person in a vast and lonely world. It was a good life, they both agreed as sleep claimed them that night. Better than good. It was everything, and high above the cabin, the stars wheeled in their ancient dance, silent witnesses to every love story ever told, shining down on the mountain where a man had mended a fence and found his heart, where a woman had won a claim and found her home, where two souls had become one in the wild and beautiful territory of the American West. The end of this telling, but never the end of their story. For true love does not end with words on a page or sunset over mountains. It endures, growing deeper and richer with each passing season, a living thing that transcends time and circumstance. Ryland and Tessa Ingram lived on that mountain for many more years, their love a beacon for their children and grandchildren. Proof that the best things in life come not from solitary struggle but from partnership, from the courage to let someone in and the wisdom to recognize when you have found something worth keeping. They worked side by side until age finally slowed them, and even then, they found joy in the simple pleasure of each other's company. Morning coffee shared on the porch, evening conversations by the fire, the comfort of familiar hands clasped together in the darkness. When Ryland passed in 1925 at the age of 72, it was peacefully in his sleep with Tessa beside him. She held his hand as his breathing slowed and stopped, and though her heart broke with grief, she was grateful beyond measure for the 36 years they had shared. Grateful for every moment, every laugh, every challenge they had faced together. She lived 3 more years without him, cared for by devoted children and grandchildren. And when she finally joined him in 1928, it was with his name on her lips and a smile on her face. They buried her beside him on the mountain they both loved, under the aspens and pines where the wind sang through the branches and the stars shone bright and clear. Their children maintained the homestead, passing it down through generations, and the story of how Ryland and Tessa met became family legend. The mountain man who mended a fence and found his soulmate. The independent woman who learned that accepting help was not weakness but wisdom. The fence itself lasted for nearly a century, finally falling to age and weather in the 1980s, but the love it represented never faded. It lived on in the descendants who still called that mountain home, in the values of partnership and mutual respect that Ryland and Tessa had modeled, in the simple understanding that the best things in life are not won or claimed but built. Day by day, with patience and care and love, their cabin still stands, preserved by the family as a reminder of where it all began. The porch where they courted, the fireplace where they warmed themselves through long winters, the bedroom where they loved and laughed and held each other through joy and sorrow. It is all there, waiting for those who come after to understand that great love stories are not about grand gestures or dramatic moments. They are about showing up day after day, about mending fences both literal and figurative, about having the courage to love even when it is frightening, to trust even when you have been hurt, to build even when you cannot see the final form of what you are creating. Ryland mended Tessa's fence and lost his heart, but in losing it, he found something far greater. He found partnership, family, purpose, and a love that transcended the simple boundaries of property lines and land claims. Tessa won the claim beside his in the land lottery, but the real prize was not the 160 acres of mountain land. It was the man who helped her build a home, who saw her strength and never tried to diminish it, who loved her fiercely and completely until his last breath. Together they proved that the best legacies are not built alone. They are built in partnership, with someone who challenges you and supports you, who makes you better than you could be by yourself, who sees all of you and loves what they see. And if you stand on that mountain today, in the quiet of early morning when the mist still clings to the valleys, you can almost hear the echo of an axe splitting wood, the sound of a wagon creaking to a halt, the first words exchanged between two people who did not yet know they were meeting their destiny. You can almost see them there, the big mountain man with his steady hands and gentle heart, the determined young woman with her fierce spirit and brave soul. Two people drawn together by chance and fate and the simple miracle of being in the right place at the right time. The land lottery brought them together, a fence gave them reason to meet, but it was love that kept them, love that built something lasting, love that echoed down through generations as proof that the best adventures are not embarked upon alone, but with someone you trust to hold your hand through whatever comes. This is the story of Ryland and Tessa, the mountain man and the homesteader, two hearts that found each other in the wilderness and built something beautiful. It is a story of courage and trust, of independence tempered with partnership, of love that started with a mended fence and lasted beyond a lifetime. And it is a story that reminds us all that sometimes the greatest claims we can win are not measured in acres or gold, but in the love of someone who sees us truly and chooses us completely, every single day for all the days we are given. Their love story began in 1889 with a fence and a land claim, and it continues still, carried forward by all who remember them, all who were touched by their example, all who understand that true love is not found but built, not won but earned, not claimed but freely given and gratefully received. This is how a mountain man mended a fence and lost his heart. This is how a woman won a claim and found her home. This is how two became one, and one became many, and love endured beyond the boundaries of time and mortality. This is the story of Ryland and Tessa Ingram, and it is a story worth remembering.